Believe it or not, Bill Clinton was impeached exactly 21 years to the day. The calendar may have been the same here, but just about seemingly everything else is different. President Clinton, when confronted with the evidence, he was contrite.
My family, also my friends, my staff, my cabinet, Monica Lewinsky and her family, and the American people. I have asked all for their forgiveness.
Now flash forward 21 years.
It's a witch hunt, it's a sham, it's a hoax. Nothing was done wrong, zero was done wrong.
Obviously, the differences between then and now don't stop there. Clinton's White House, they cooperated and complied with the subpoenas. As we know, Trump doing neither. Then, of course, we have the partisanship. In 1998, more than 30 Democrats supported the impeachment inquiry into Clinton, and 5 of them voted to impeach them. Yesterday, 0 Republicans crossed the aisle to vote for an inquiry, and none voted to impeach. Also, 2 Democrats, they did vote no to the first article last night, 3 voting no for the second. Joining me now, someone uniquely qualified to discuss this, Nelson Cunningham. He's a former advisor to President Clinton. He's also a former federal prosecutor and former general counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Sorry to date you there, Nelson. But here's my question. Is it that back then, and let's use Clinton as an example of someone who went through impeachment, it didn't dawn on them that members of the administration they could have basically refused to allow to testify, or they didn't have to turn over documents? Because part of the president and fellow Republicans on the Hill, they're claiming that due process was voided here. The president never got to present his defense, when in fact, on multiple occasions in both the Intel and Judiciary hearings, he was afforded just that. And Senator McConnell today said, listen, we don't have all the evidence. I don't want second or third hand accounts. Meanwhile, first hand people could testify if they basically went along with the subpoenas, and theoretically they could have exculpatory evidence that would clear the president, but they've been denied to do so. Is it that they never played the card before, or they didn't realize that they could?
Well, it's you've got all the facts exactly right, and you've laid them out for your viewers just right. There is always a push me, pull you, and I've seen this from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. There is always a push me, pull you between Congress's wish to know and the executive's desire to push back. In the Clinton years, I was engaged in many fights between the Congress and the executive, asking for White House witnesses, White House documents. The White House would push back, and then inevitably, and this has been true of every administration I can think of until the Trump administration, there's been some sort of a compromise reached. In the Nixon years, Nixon fought subpoenas, but then he also allowed some documents to go forward. He allowed some of his senior White House employees to go forward. Clinton allowed almost all of his White House employees and government officials to be called in his impeachment inquiry. There's always been back and forth. Congress has usually gotten a big chunk of the loaf. Sometimes they've gotten to court to get that chunk of the loaf. We should come back to that. But Trump has done something entirely new, which is to say, I am not going to give you anything. He has said, I'm not going to respond to a single subpoena for documents. I'm not going to respond to a single subpoena for witnesses, and I'm going to tell all government employees they should not testify. Some came ahead and testified anyway, like Ambassador Taylor in Ukraine and Ambassador Sondland, who came forward. But Trump's instructions were, do not testify. That is unprecedented.
So now it's at the Senate phase, and we saw very stridently McConnell say, I'm going to work hand in glove with the administration, which in user-friendly terms for the audience, it's as if the prosecutor, or in this case, you got the defense saying, you know, okay, how do you want to do the trial? And this defense basically gets to make up the rules for what is supposed to be 100 jurors here that are impartial to it. Clearly, that's not the case. So McConnell's not going to go there unless forced, but let's assume there's 5 Republicans who are not comfortable with that in the Senate. that say, listen, whether it's for political reasons or ethical reasons, we at least got to know the facts of this before we can move ahead. Is there a practical way forward, Nelson, where we're going to at least hear from some of the witnesses? I know Schumer wanted 4 and he's been refused outright. Is that just horse trading? Or do you think at the end of the day we're not going to hear from anybody?
Well, we're operating a little bit in terra incognita. We don't have great precedent, at least at the presidential level, when it comes to this. In the Nixon years, of course, we didn't get to a formal impeachment because he resigned before he was formally impeached. In the Clinton years, we did have an impeachment. We did have a trial in the Senate. At that trial in the Senate, there were no witnesses whatsoever. There was a voluminous record that had been collected by Kenneth Starr and his special counsel Office of Prosecutors. Incidentally, President Clinton never got to have a lawyer in that investigation. He got to have no cross-examination of those witnesses because it was a criminal investigation. It was a grand jury investigation, and defendants don't get to have witnesses, don't get to have their lawyers in the grand jury room. So all this talk we hear about how the House proceeding was so unfair because Trump didn't have his lawyers in there completely ignores the historical precedent here and completely ignores the nature of the two. Getting to the Senate, in Clinton's trial in the Senate, there were no witnesses whatsoever. Everybody agreed they would just go on the record that had been compiled by the House. It would be something new and novel and extraordinary to have live witnesses testifying on the floor of the Senate about the events underlying here. It's a double-edged sword for both sides. Trump would like to get what he considers some of his, quote, friendly witnesses up to testify. And by the way, Chuck Schumer, as you pointed out, he sent a list forward. He would love to have the Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, come and testify about his conversations with President Trump. And he'd love to have John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor, come and testify about his conversations with Donald Trump. How will it be decided? At the end of the day, the Senate votes by a majority. During the trial itself, Chief Justice Roberts will sit in the chair and preside. He will make evidentiary and procedural rulings, but he can be overruled by a majority vote of the sitting senators. So it's a curious thing. You have senators who are supposed to be jurors, but they're also the ones who are setting up the rules, and they get to overrule the judge. It's a one-of-a-kind proceeding.
Nelson, there are those, and I think they're throwing the Hail Mary that says Justice Roberts here, he could play the role of hero in terms of compelling certain witnesses to maybe testify. First of all, historically, I know in Rehnquist's case, he basically called balls and strikes. He wasn't very activist, certainly, in the role of judge in this case. Forgetting the math of being overruled for a moment, what kind of discretion does Roberts really have? And practically, are people just inflating hopes that it's not going to happen?
I think they are probably inflating hopes. Justice Roberts is by nature a cautious, small c conservative person. He is deeply concerned about the institutional integrity and reputation of the Supreme Court. He will look very closely at how Justice Rehnquist handled this matter in the Clinton years, and I think he will model himself on that. Also, you asked me to disregard the fact that he can be overruled by the Senate, but Justice Roberts is also very canny politically. He is not going to put himself in a place where he will rule one way and put himself in contradiction to the 53 members of his own party, the Republican Party, who could overrule him. I just don't see that happening.
Finally, Nelson, I just before you, I just spoke to Senator Dorgan, and he says he can't even recognize some of his former colleagues, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, et cetera. I'm curious if you can recognize your old boss. You were hired at the SDNY by Rudy Giuliani, and somebody somewhere will explain to me the logic with whatever is going on. You know, he's now playing documentarian in the Ukraine. I know fresh back, but sometimes I wonder who's crazier, the client or his attorney in this relationship. Does he resemble at all the former federal prosecutor that you worked for?
Well, look, I worked in that office. The guy in the office next to me was Jim Comey. The guy in the office next to him was the one who investigated the Scooter Libby case and the World Trade Center cases. We were all young. We were all enormously proud to be working for Rudy Giuliani and to help clean up New York. But a group of us got together a little over a year ago, before any of this came up, for a dinner, a reunion dinner. And we looked at each other and we all said, what has happened to Rudy? Someone said, I think he's gone crazy. What's happened in the last 6 months, it's even further beyond. But you know what? I think that my old boss is doing exactly what his client, the president, wants him to do. Donald Trump thrives when there's chaos. He thrives when people have no idea which way is up or down. What's the fact? Is it Friday? Is it Wednesday? Who knows? It's all a mess. It's all chaos. Every time Rudy Giuliani goes on TV and confuses people, even if he's saying damning things, as he did just this week in a conversation describing his conversations with Donald Trump, at the end of the day, people are scratching their heads going, what the heck did he just say, and could it really be true? I think Donald Trump loves that. Every time Rudy gets off the camera, I think Trump goes, great. You confuse people even more. You threw even more sand in their eyes. You're the lawyer that I hired, and you're the lawyer that I'm glad I have.
I just shake my head because in a recent interview, somebody said, well, what if he cuts you loose like he cuts everybody else loose? And Rudy says, I got insurance, meaning I've got damning information on my client, and somehow the two deserve each other. But Nelson, I appreciate the time today. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to be with you and your viewers.
All right, everyone, when we come back, a little history lesson. Hamilton's not just a hit on Broadway, he's also been one of the stars of the impeachment showdown as both sides quote the founding father to make their respective cases. After the break, we're going to show you how Alexander is a player both on Broadway and Capitol Hill.